Blood trickled down Joseph Turner's temple as the officers finally removed his handcuffs. The precinct captain's face had turned ghostly white after answering the phone. Lieutenant General Benjamin Turner will arrive in 30 minutes to collect his father, he announced shakily. Everything was about to change. Before we dive into this powerful story of injustice and vindication, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed prejudice in action, and subscribe to join our community, fighting for equality through storytelling. Now let's rewind to see how this shocking moment came to be. The morning sun cast long shadows across Joseph Turner's meticulously maintained garden as the 74-year-old Air Force Master Sergeant carefully pruned his prized rose bushes. His weathered hands, marked with the calluses of both military service and decades of hard work, moved with precision despite the arthritis that had settled into his joints years ago. The Oakland Hills neighborhood sprawled around him, an affluent community of manicured lawns and luxury vehicles that Joseph had only recently joined. After selling his modest home in a predominantly black neighborhood across town, he had used his lifetime savings and a portion of his pension to purchase this smaller but well-situated property, primarily to be closer to his son Benjamin's family, whenever they visited California. The move had been recent, just 2 weeks ago, and Joseph had been so busy unpacking and setting up his new home that he'd barely had time to meet any neighbors. Most mornings, he observed them from his porch, as they hurried to their expensive cars, briefcases in hand, barely glancing his way. Joseph didn't mind the solitude. After Vietnam and raising a son alone following his wife Clara's early death from cancer, he had grown accustomed to handling life's challenges independently. This Tuesday afternoon, Joseph decided to walk to the corner store for his daily newspaper, a ritual he refused to abandon despite his son's offers to buy him a tablet for digital news. "I like the feel of paper," he always said. "Some traditions deserve to survive." He locked his front door, tucked his house key into his pocket, and set off down the tree-lined street. The late spring air carried the scent of jasmine and freshly cut grass as Joseph walked at a measured pace, his slight limp a souvenir from shrapnel he'd taken, protecting his unit during his second tour in Vietnam. 3 blocks from his house, Joseph noticed the police cruiser that had passed him twice now, slowing each time. His military instincts, never fully dormant despite the decades of civilian life, registered the attention as deliberate. When the vehicle pulled alongside him and 2 officers emerged, Joseph stopped walking and faced them directly, his posture automatically straightening as it had during countless military inspections. Officers Riley Beckman and Trevor Hoffman approached, with hands resting near their holsters, both white men in their mid-30s, with the confident stride of those accustomed to authority without challenge. "Afternoon, sir," Officer Beckman said, his tone professionally distant. "We've received calls about a suspicious person in this area. Mind if we ask what you're doing here?" Joseph maintained his composure, despite the familiar sinking feeling in his stomach. "I'm walking to the store for a newspaper. I live just 3 blocks back," he explained, gesturing toward his home. "May I see some identification?" Officer Hoffman asked, his eyes scanning Joseph's simple attire of pressed khakis and a plain blue button-down shirt. Joseph patted his pockets and realized he'd left his wallet on the kitchen counter. "I apologize, but I left my wallet at home. I'm just going to the corner store and back. I didn't think I'd need it." The officers exchanged glances that Joseph had seen countless times before, skepticism tinged with presumption. "You say you live around here?" Beckman's question carried clear disbelief. "Yes, on Maple Terrace, number 1478. I moved in 2 weeks ago." "That's interesting," Hoffman said, "because we know most residents in this neighborhood, and I don't recall seeing you before." Joseph maintained his dignity despite the rising tension. "As I said, I'm new to the area. I sold my home in East Oakland to be closer to my son's family when they visit." "And what does your son do?" Beckman asked, his tone increasingly confrontational as he stepped closer to Joseph. "My son is a lieutenant general in the United States. Air Force currently stationed at the Pentagon," Joseph answered with quiet pride. The statement hung in the air for a moment before both officers broke into poorly concealed smirks. "Sure, and I'm the Secretary of Defense," Beckman replied, eliciting a chuckle from his partner. Sir, this is a high-value neighborhood and we take security seriously here. Now I'll ask you once more, what's your actual business in this area? Joseph felt a familiar heat rising in his chest. Not anger, but the weight of recurring indignity. I've told you the truth. If you'll allow me to walk back to my house, I can show you my identification and military service records. When Joseph turned slightly toward the direction of his home, Officer Hoffman grabbed his arm roughly. We're not done here, sir. The sudden movement aggravated Joseph's bad hip, causing him to wince and shift his weight, which the officers immediately interpreted as resistance. Stop resisting, Beckman shouted, loud enough for the command to echo down the quiet street. From behind her floral curtains, Martha Whitaker, a 60-something white woman who had lived in the neighborhood for decades, watched the scene unfold, but remained frozen behind the safety of her window. Joseph found himself spun around and pressed against the police cruiser, as handcuffs were secured around his wrists, tight enough to bite into his aged skin. I am not resisting, Joseph stated calmly, though his heart raced with a combination of pain, indignity, and the muscle memory of similar encounters throughout his long life. You have no cause to detain me. Failure to identify yourself and suspicious behavior are cause enough, Hoffman replied, as he conducted a rough pat-down that further aggravated Joseph's old injuries. Through the cruiser's window, Joseph caught sight of several neighbors who had emerged from their homes to witness the commotion, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern, but none approached to intervene. As the officers forced him into the back seat of their patrol car, Joseph Turner sat straight-backed despite the handcuffs, his military bearing intact, even as blood began to seep from where the metal had cut into his wrists. The car pulled away from the curb, carrying Joseph from the neighborhood he had saved for decades to call home, while neighbors watched from behind windows and garden gates, silent witnesses to a scene that would soon send ripples far beyond their quiet streets. The fluorescent lights of the precinct buzzed overhead as Joseph Turner sat handcuffed to a metal bench in the processing area, his military training allowing him to maintain perfect posture despite the discomfort and humiliation. 3 hours had passed since his arrest, yet the officers had made no effort to process him quickly or verify his claims. Around him, the station bustled with activity, officers and administrative staff occasionally glancing his way with expressions ranging from indifference to barely concealed contempt. The harsh lighting emphasized every line on Joseph's face, a map of 74 years of life, including 2 tours in Vietnam that flashed through his mind now as he practiced the same patience that had kept him alive in the jungle. He remembered the sweltering heat of Da Nang in 1969, where he'd earned his first Purple Heart, pulling 3 men from a burning transport under enemy fire. He remembered returning home in uniform to a country that often treated him with the same suspicion he faced today, despite the medals on his chest. The handcuffs bit deeper into his wrists as he shifted slightly to ease the pressure on his bad hip, a small grimace the only indication of his discomfort. Officer Beckman strolled past, deliberately bumping Joseph's injured leg as he passed. "Getting comfortable, General's dad?" he asked loudly enough for nearby officers to hear, triggering snickers from several desks. "Need to call the Pentagon." "For a special extraction?" Joseph remained silent, his eyes focused straight ahead, a technique he'd perfected during interrogation training. He had requested a phone call 3 times now, each request acknowledged with "in a minute" that stretched into hours. His thoughts drifted to Benjamin, who would be in meetings at the Pentagon now, unaware that his father sat handcuffed in a police station for the crime of walking while black in an affluent neighborhood. From across the room, Sergeant Diana Martinez observed the scene with growing discomfort. A 20-year veteran of the force and the daughter of Mexican immigrants, she had worked twice as hard as her colleagues for half the recognition, making her particularly attuned to the subtle and not so subtle currents of discrimination that sometimes flowed through the department. After watching Beckman's deliberate provocation, she approached Joseph with a paper cup of water. "Sir, are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" she asked, noting the dried blood on his wrists where the handcuffs had cut into his skin. Joseph looked up, his dignity intact despite the circumstances. "I'm fine, Sergeant. Thank you for asking. I would appreciate that phone call I'm legally entitled to, however. Something in his composure gave Martinez pause. This wasn't the typical profile of suspects who came through their doors. You mentioned earlier that you're a veteran, she asked, maintaining a professional distance but with genuine curiosity. Yes, Air Force Master Sergeant, retired. 2. Tours in Vietnam, 27 years of service in total. Joseph's voice carried no self-pity, only stated facts. Martinez nodded, still not entirely convinced but increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. And you said your son is in the military as well? Joseph noted her skepticism, but appreciated the first real conversation he'd had since his arrest. My son is Lieutenant General Benjamin Turner, currently Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations at the Pentagon. He served for 29 years, graduated top of his class at the Air Force Academy. Officer Beckman, who had been listening nearby, laughed openly. Sure, Gramps. And my dad's the president. Martinez shot Beckman a sharp look before turning back to Joseph. Sir, do you have anything that might corroborate your identity? After a moment's hesitation, Joseph replied, My wallet was returned to me during processing. There are photographs inside. Martinez retrieved the wallet from the property desk and opened it, finding Joseph's driver's license, confirming his address in the Oakland Hills neighborhood, his military ID, and several photographs. One showed a younger Joseph in full dress, uniform decorated with multiple medals, including the Purple Heart and Bronze Star. Another showed him standing proudly next to a tall, distinguished black man in the uniform of an Air Force general. The family resemblance was unmistakable. Martinez studied the photos carefully, her expression shifting as she began to realize they might have made a serious error. Mr. Turner, would you mind telling me how you ended up in this neighborhood? It might help clarify things. Joseph's dual eyes took on a distant quality as he spoke about raising Benjamin alone after his wife Clara died of breast cancer when their son was only 12. I worked 2 jobs sometimes, made sure he had everything he needed for school. He was always brilliant, determined. When he got the appointment to the Air Force Academy, it was the proudest day of my life. He described Benjamin's rise through the ranks, his combat service in Iraq and Afghanistan, his rapid promotions based on exceptional leadership. As Joseph spoke, Martinez discreetly checked the address on his license against property records, confirming he indeed owned the home he'd claimed. She also searched Benjamin Turner's name on her phone, finding numerous mentions of the Lieutenant General's distinguished career. Martinez approached Officers Beckman and Hoffman, who were laughing at some private joke near the coffee machine. Can I speak with you both? She asked, her tone making it clear this wasn't a request. In a corner away from Joseph's hearing, she confronted them. Did you verify any of Mr. Turner's claims before bringing him in? Beckman shrugged dismissively. Come on, Martinez. You think some old black guy wandering around Oakland Hills actually lives there? And the whole, my son is a general bit, please. Actually, Martinez replied, holding up her phone with a photo of Lieutenant General Benjamin Turner at a Pentagon press conference. His son is exactly who he said he is, and Mr. Turner does own a home at the address he gave you. Hoffman shifted. Uncomfortably, but Beckman remained defiant. He was acting suspicious, couldn't produce ID when asked. We followed protocol. Martinez's expression hardened. Protocol doesn't include ignoring someone's constitutional rights or leaving an elderly veteran handcuffed for hours without cause. She turned to leave, but added, I'm documenting this in my report. You should think about doing the same. As Martinez walked away, Joseph suddenly winced and placed a hand against his chest, a flash of pain crossing his features. Martinez quickly returned to him. Mr. Turner, are you all right? Do you need medical attention? Joseph took several measured breaths before responding. Just some chest pain. It happened sometimes since my last surgery. I'll be fine. Martinez frowned. I should call a medic to check you out. Joseph shook his head firmly. No. Just get me my phone call. I don't want any more complications. Martinez hesitated, concerned about his health, but understanding his distrust of further institutional involvement. I'll get you that call right now, sir. As she walked away to arrange for Joseph's long-overdue phone call, Martinez stepped outside the precinct doors, pulled out her personal cell phone and, after a moment's deliberation, placed a call to her former colleague who now worked as military liaison with local law enforcement. "Mike, it's Diana Martinez. I need a favor, and it's urgent. We have a situation here that's about to become a very big problem for everyone involved." 5 hours had now passed since Joseph Turner's arrest, the precinct clock ticking away minutes that stretched into an eternity of fluorescent-lit indignity. Still without formal charges, Joseph remained handcuffed to the bench, his military-trained endurance tested by both physical discomfort and the knowledge that such treatment revealed a system broken not by accident, but by design. Would you continue fighting for respect in a country that repeatedly fails to recognize your humanity despite decades of service? Comment number 1. If you believe Joseph should demand immediate legal representation, or number 2, if you think patience might serve him better in this situation. Either way, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to hear more stories that expose the reality many veterans of color face every day. Now, let's see how this tense situation continues. To unfold at the precinct, Captain Ronald Wilson, a stocky white man with thinning hair and 27 years on the force, scowled as he reviewed the arrest report submitted by officers Beckman and Hoffman. Something about the sparse details and vague justifications triggered his veteran officer's instinct that paperwork was being crafted to justify actions rather than document them accurately. "Explain to me again why this 74-year-old man needed to be brought in rather than having his identity verified at his residence," Wilson demanded, looking up from the report at the two officers standing before his desk. Beckman cleared his throat, standing slightly straighter. "Sir, the subject was evasive about his purpose in the neighborhood, couldn't provide identification, and became physically resistant when questioned further." Hoffman nodded in agreement. "He made sudden movements when we attempted to detain him for questioning. Given the recent burglaries in the area, we felt it prudent to bring him in." Wilson's eyes narrowed at the familiar language that often populated reports when officers needed justification after the fact. "And did either of you actually check if he lived at the address he provided?" The momentary silence answered his question before Beckman replied, "We intended to verify that information during processing, Captain." Wilson tossed the report onto his desk with visible frustration. "So instead of walking 3 blocks to verify his address, you brought in an elderly veteran and left him handcuffed for 5 hours? Is that your understanding of community policing?" Before either officer could respond, Wilson dismissed them with a wave. "Update your report with actual details. I want times, specific responses, and documented resistance if you're claiming it existed." As they left his office, Wilson pinched the bridge of his nose, sensing a headache forming that had nothing to do with his long shift and everything to do with potential departmental embarrassment. In the main processing area, Joseph found himself subjected to yet another round of questioning, this time from a detective who seemed determined to find inconsistencies in his story. "Mr. Turner, let's be clear about what you were really doing in that neighborhood," the detective pressed, leaning across the table. "An afternoon stroll doesn't typically draw multiple calls from concerned residents." Joseph met the detective's gaze steadily. "I was walking to purchase a newspaper, as I've stated repeatedly. If neighbors called because a black man walking through his own neighborhood seemed suspicious, that reflects their prejudice, not my behavior." The detective's expression hardened at Joseph's calm logic. "You have to understand how it looks. When someone can't provide identification in an area known for certain demographics." Joseph felt a familiar weight press against his chest, not the physical pain from earlier, but the accumulated burden of countless such interactions across decades of American life. "I understand precisely how it looks when a black man is presumed criminal until proven innocent, regardless of his age, accomplishments, or legal rights." Meanwhile, Sergeant Martinez continued her discreet investigation, using her lunch break to dig deeper into Joseph's background. His military record confirmed everything he'd claimed: 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star with Valor, 27 years of exemplary service. She discovered a local news article from 3 months ago mentioning Lieutenant General Benjamin Turner's pride in his father relocating to Oakland to be closer to family when the general's Pentagon duties permitted visits. Martinez felt a growing unease about how this situation was being handled, especially as she observed the department's shift toward damage control rather than accountability. Joseph was eventually moved to a holding cell with 3 other detainees, all men of color arrested for various minor offenses. As the heavy door clanged shut, Joseph took a seat on the metal bench, maintaining his dignified posture despite exhaustion beginning to show in the slight slump of his shoulders. A young black man sitting opposite him nodded in greeting. "They got you too, old-timer. What's your crime, existing while black?" Joseph studied the young man, noting his intelligent eyes and the way he carried himself despite the surroundings. "Apparently, walking to buy a newspaper in my own neighborhood. Warranted arrest." The young man extended his hand. "Deshaun Williams, third-year law student at Berkeley, arrested for matching the description of someone who allegedly shoplifted 2 miles away. Never mind that the description was simply black male, medium height." Joseph shook his hand. "Joseph Turner, retired Air Force Master Sergeant." Deshaun's eyebrows raised slightly. "Military man. Thought they'd show more respect for veterans." Joseph's laugh held no humor. "Respect comes with conditions in this country. Always has." Over the next hour, Joseph shared wisdom gleaned from navigating 7 decades of American racial politics. "Dignity is something they try to take, son. Never surrender it voluntarily. That's the first victory they seek, making you feel less than human." Deshaun absorbed Joseph's words, recognizing their truth in his own briefer but similar experiences. "I'm studying civil rights law for exactly this reason," Deshaun explained. "These systemic abuses continue because they're rarely challenged effectively. The system protects itself." Their conversation was interrupted when the cell door opened, and a flustered officer called for Joseph. "Turner, come with me now." Captain Wilson's phone had been ringing non-stop for the past 15 minutes, the calls increasingly urgent and from increasingly higher ranks. The latest call had left him pale and uncharacteristically nervous. The Pentagon was requesting information about a detained veteran named Joseph Turner, and the tone made it clear this was not a routine inquiry. Wilson rushed from his office toward the holding cells, cursing under his breath. "Get Turner to my office immediately," he barked at the nearest officer. "And for God's sake, remove those handcuffs." As Joseph was hurriedly escorted through the precinct, he noticed a dramatic shift in how officers regarded him. Gone were the dismissive glances and smirks, replaced by careful neutrality or averted eyes. Captain Wilson stood at his office door, a forced smile stretching across his face. "Mr. Turner, please come in. There seems to have been an unfortunate misunderstanding today." Joseph said nothing as he was ushered into the office, the same dignity that had sustained him through war and discrimination now serving as silent testimony against a system suddenly scrambling to cover its tracks. Outside the office, Martinez watched the scene unfold with grim satisfaction and growing concern for what would come next. She had made her call, set the wheels of justice in motion, but understood better than most that those wheels could crush careers, including potentially her own when they finally began to turn. Captain Wilson's office felt suddenly inadequate for the gravity of the situation developing within its walls. The institutional beige paint and generic furnishings at odds with the military precision of Joseph Turner's bearing as he sat across from the increasingly uncomfortable police captain. "Mr. Turner, I want to personally apologize for any inconvenience you've experienced today," Wilson began, his tone dramatically different from the institutional indifference that had characterized Joseph's previous 5 hours in custody. "There appears to have been a significant misunderstanding." Joseph regarded him silently, decades of military discipline evident in his composed demeanor, despite the dried blood still visible on his wrists where the handcuffs had cut into his skin. "Captain, is there a particular reason my inconvenience has suddenly warranted your attention when my repeated requests for a phone call were ignored for hours?" Wilson shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the practiced authority in his voice, giving way to something approaching genuine contrition. "Sir, I've just received a call from the Pentagon inquiring about your detainment. It seems Sergeant Martinez contacted military channels regarding your situation. The revelation didn't surprise Joseph, who had noticed the sergeant's quiet concern earlier. Wilson continued, clearing his throat. Your son, Lieutenant General Turner, has been informed of the situation and is apparently en route from Washington. For the first time since his arrest, Joseph allowed himself a small smile. Benjamin always was efficient when presented with a problem. As Wilson launched into further apologies, Joseph's mind drifted to memories of his son's childhood. Benjamin at 7, solemnly promising to protect his father after witnessing a store clerk follow them suspiciously through a department store. Benjamin at 12, standing brave-faced at his mother's funeral, holding his father's hand with unexpected strength. Benjamin at 17, announcing his intention to attend the Air Force Academy, with the determination that would eventually carry him to the Pentagon. Joseph had raised his son alone after Clara's death from cancer, working double shifts as both an Air Force non-commissioned officer and weekend security guard to ensure Benjamin had every opportunity. He'd skipped meals to afford extra tutoring, sacrificed new clothes to pay for college application fees, and spent countless nights helping with homework after exhausting days of military service. Every sacrifice had been worth it to watch Benjamin thrive, to see him become not just a successful military leader, but a man of integrity. Wilson's voice pulled Joseph back to the present. We're gathering all documentation related to your detainment to ensure complete transparency. Officers Beckman and Hoffman have been called in to discuss the incident. As if summoned by their names, the two officers appeared at the office door, their earlier swagger replaced by visible nervousness as they noticed Joseph sitting across from their captain. Come in and close the door, Wilson ordered, his tone clipped. The officers stood at attention, eyes deliberately avoiding Joseph's gaze as Wilson addressed them. Explain to me and Mr. Turner exactly what transpired during his arrest, and be aware that your earlier report contradicts several witness statements we've now received. Beckman spoke first, his confidence diminished but not entirely gone. Sir, we received calls about a suspicious person in the Oakland Hills area. Upon making contact with Mr. Turner, he was unable to provide identification and made movements. That could be interpreted as resistance. Joseph interrupted calmly. I reached toward my pocket for my house key and explained I lived nearby. When I suggested returning to my home for identification, I was immediately restrained. Hoffman interjected, Sir, given the profile of the neighborhood and recent burglary reports, the profile meaning wealthy and predominantly white, Joseph stated flatly, causing Hoffman to fall silent. The uncomfortable truth hung in the sour air until Wilson spoke again. We've reviewed security footage from several homes in the area. This announcement caused both officers to stiffen noticeably. The footage doesn't show any resistance or threatening movements from Mr. Turner before you physically restrained him. Before either officer could respond, Wilson's phone rang again. After a brief conversation, he hung up and addressed the room. There's someone here who witnessed the arrest and would like to speak with us. A moment later, an officer escorted Martha Whitaker into the increasingly crowded office. The older white woman clutched her designer handbag nervously as she took in the scene, her eyes eventually settling on Joseph with unmistakable remorse. Mr. Turner, I live 3 doors down from your new home, she began, her voice quavering slightly. I saw what happened today from my window, and I've brought my security camera footage. She placed a USB drive on Wilson's desk. The officers were unnecessarily rough with you. You weren't resisting at all. In fact, you were being exceedingly polite despite their treatment. Martha turned to face the officers directly. I heard everything through my open window. You mocked him when he mentioned his son's military rank. You ignored his offer to walk to his house for identification. Her voice grew stronger with each word. I'm ashamed I didn't intervene immediately. I've lived in this neighborhood for 30 years, and I've never felt more disappointed in those sworn to protect us. The revelation of video evidence transformed the dynamic in the room, with Beckman and Hoffman now looking distinctly uncomfortable as Wilson inserted the USB drive into his computer. The footage clearly showed Joseph's calm demeanor throughout, the encounter and the escalation coming entirely from the officers. including Beckman's derisive comment about the Secretary of Defense that he had denied making in his report. Joseph watched the video with a complex mixture of vindication and profound sadness, recognizing the familiar pattern that had played out countless times in his life and the lives of so many others. Only this time, technology and his son's position might actually bring consequences. Sergeant Martinez knocked and entered the office, addressing Wilson directly. "Captain, we have a developing situation. News vans are arriving outside the precinct. Someone tipped off the media about a decorated Vietnam veteran being detained." Wilson's face tightened with concern as he realized the potential public relations disaster unfolding. How did they get wind of this so quickly? Martinez shrugged slightly. "Sir, Lieutenant General Turner is a high-profile military leader. Once the Pentagon became involved, it was likely only a matter of time." Joseph observed the growing panic among the department leadership with detached interest, his military experience having taught him that true character emerged most clearly when plans collapsed. He felt no satisfaction in their discomfort, only a weary recognition of the institutional scramble that always followed when power structures faced potential accountability. The precinct's public affairs officer burst into the room without knocking. "Captain, we need a statement immediately. Channel 7 is reporting that we detained a decorated Vietnam veteran for walking in his own neighborhood, and they're connecting it to 3 other racial profiling complaints from last month." Wilson rubbed his temples, visibly struggling to contain the rapidly expanding crisis. "Move Mr. Turner to the conference room. Get him whatever he needs, food, medical attention, anything." He turned to Joseph with forced cordiality. "Sir, we want to make this right. What can we do for you while we wait for your son's arrival?" Joseph rose slowly, his dignity intact despite the day's indignities. "What I wanted was to be treated with the same respect as any other citizen in my neighborhood. Failing that, I would appreciate a glass of water and perhaps a first aid kit for my wrists." The simple, reasonable request hung in the air, highlighting the absurdity of the situation more effectively than any accusation could have. As Joseph was escorted to the conference room, his thoughts turned to Benjamin, who would be landing soon. His son had faced his own battles with discrimination throughout his military career, but had navigated them with strategic brilliance, picking his battles carefully while steadily ascending the ranks. Today, however, would test the careful balance Benjamin had maintained between his military duty and his identity as a black man in America. The conference room door had barely closed behind Joseph when Captain Wilson's phone rang once more. The caller ID displayed a Department of Defense number, and Wilson answered with palpable tension. "Captain Wilson speaking." The voice on the other end was crisp and authoritative. "Captain, this is Colonel James Harrington, aide to Lieutenant General Turner. The General's military transport has just landed at Oakland International Airport. He will arrive at your precinct in approximately 20 minutes. The General has requested that his father receive immediate medical attention for any injuries sustained during his detainment. Do you require clarification on any of these points?" Wilson swallowed hard before responding. "No, Colonel, everything is clear. We're preparing for the General's arrival now." As he hung up the phone, Wilson stared at the frozen video frame on his computer monitor, showing his officers mocking a decorated veteran who had bled for his country in Vietnam, and whose son now held enough military authority to create serious repercussions for everyone involved. The crisis that had begun with a simple walk to buy a newspaper was about to escalate into something that would change the department forever. The precinct fell into an unnatural hush as Lieutenant General Benjamin Turner strode through the front doors, his 6'4" frame commanding immediate attention even before the 4 silver stars on his shoulders registered in the collective consciousness of everyone present. In full-dress uniform, medals aligned with perfect precision across his chest, Benjamin Turner was the physical embodiment of military authority, his bearing so formal and posture so rigid that several officers instinctively stood straighter as he passed. Captain Wilson rushed forward, hand extended. "General Turner, I'm Captain Ronald Wilson. I want to personally assure you that we're treating this situation with the utmost..." Benjamin cut him off with a slight raise of his hand, his voice measured, but carrying an unmistakable edge of controlled anger. "Where is my father, Captain?" The directness of the question left no room for pleasantries or excuses. "Conference room B, sir. This way. He's been provided medical attention as requested." Benjamin nodded curtly, following Wilson through the suddenly silent precinct where all activity seemed to have paused, officers and administrative staff alike watching the general's purposeful stride, with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. When Benjamin entered the conference room and saw his father, his military composure wavered momentarily. Joseph sat with medical gauze wrapped around his wrists, a butterfly bandage at his temple, his posture military straight despite the exhaustion evident in his eyes. "Dad," Benjamin said simply, crossing the room in 3 long strides. Joseph stood to embrace his son, their hug brief but powerful, before both men resumed the dignified bearing that had carried them through decades of navigating America as black men of achievement. "You didn't need to come all this way, son," Joseph said, though his eyes revealed his gratitude. "I was handling it." Benjamin's expression softened briefly. "I know you were, Dad. You always do." He turned to address the room, his voice resuming its official cadence. "I'd like a moment alone with my father." The medical personnel and officers quickly exited, leaving father and son in momentary privacy. Once the door closed, Benjamin's carefully maintained composure gave way to genuine concern. "Are you really okay? Don't downplay anything." Joseph sighed, allowing himself to show more of the day's toll. "Nothing I haven't experienced before, Benjamin. My wrists are cut up from the cuffs, my hips acting up from how they handled me, and my blood pressure's probably through the roof. But I'm still here." Benjamin's jaw tightened. "Tell me everything, Dad. I need to know exactly what happened." Joseph recounted the events in precise detail, his military training evident in the clarity of his report, the initial stop, the dismissal of his explanation, the mockery when he mentioned his son's rank, the unnecessary force during arrest, and the hours of being ignored at the precinct. As he spoke, Benjamin's expression remained controlled, but Joseph recognized the cold anger building behind his son's eyes, the same expression Benjamin had shown as a child when facing injustice he couldn't immediately rectify. "They wouldn't have treated a white veteran this way," Joseph concluded simply. "You and I both know that." Benjamin nodded once, sharply. "Yes, we do." Memories cascaded through Benjamin's mind as his father spoke, watching Joseph being followed by security, guards in department stores throughout his childhood, seeing his brilliant father passed over for promotions in his post-military career despite superior qualifications, the countless talks Joseph had given him about how to survive police encounters as a black man. Benjamin had faced his own battles with discrimination throughout his military career, the whispered suggestions that his promotions were due to affirmative action rather than his exemplary record, the surprised expressions when he demonstrated exceptional tactical knowledge, the way some subordinates initially tested his authority in ways they never would with white officers. He had navigated these challenges strategically, picking his battles while steadily ascending the ranks through undeniable competence and political savvy. Today, however, the personal and professional collided in a way that demanded response. "It's time," Benjamin said, standing to his full height. "Captain Wilson is waiting outside with the officers involved. I intend to address this formally." Joseph recognized the resolve in his son's voice, the same tone Benjamin had used when announcing his decision to attend the Air Force Academy or when deploying to combat zones. "Be careful, son. Your position is exactly why I need to address this," Benjamin finished. "Some battles can't be delegated." When Captain Wilson and Officers Beckman and Hoffman were invited back into the conference room, they found the Turners standing side by side, 2 generations of military precision presenting a united front. Benjamin wasted no time on preliminaries. "Captain Wilson, I've reviewed the security footage and heard my father's account of today's events. What I've witnessed represents a fundamental failure of professional policing and basic human dignity." His voice remained measured, but carried the weight of someone accustomed to command. "Officers Beckman and Hoffman, you detained a decorated, Veteran with 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star for walking in his own neighborhood. You mocked his military service and mine. You used unnecessary force on a 74-year-old man with documented war injuries. You filed false reports to cover your misconduct. Beckman shifted uncomfortably, but attempted to defend himself. Sir, with all due respect, we were responding to calls about a suspicious person. Were you? Benjamin interrupted, his tone arctic. Because the calls you referenced in your report occurred after you began following my father, not before. The timestamps on the dispatch records make that quite clear. The revelation hung in the air as Benjamin continued. This pattern of behavior isn't isolated, is it? Your department has faced 3 other racial profiling complaints in the past month alone. Captain Wilson attempted to regain control of the situation. General Turner, we take these allegations very seriously. I've already initiated an internal review of the incident, and these officers have been placed on administrative duty pending... Pending what, Captain? Another internal investigation that finds no wrongdoing. Another settlement with a confidentiality. Agreement. Benjamin's questions cut through the bureaucratic language. My father doesn't need your apologies or your settlements. He needs accountability. The precinct doors opened again as Mayor Alice Coleman entered, her assistant hurrying to keep pace. At 52, the mayor was a formidable presence in her own right, the first black woman to lead Oakland, and a former prosecutor known for her direct approach. Lieutenant General Turner, she acknowledged with a respectful nod before turning to Joseph. Mr. Turner, on behalf of the city, I want to express my deep regret for what you've experienced today. Benjamin appreciated her prompt arrival, but recognized the political calculations likely running through her mind. The potential scandal, the community backlash, the delicate relationship between city leadership and the police department. Joseph finally received proper medical attention as a physician examined his injuries more thoroughly, documenting the cuts on his wrists, the bruising from rough handling, and checking his elevated blood pressure. The doctor expressed concern about the stress-induced cardiac symptoms Joseph had experienced earlier, recommending further tests at a hospital. Throughout the examination, Benjamin remained by his father's side, his presence ensuring a level of care that might otherwise have been cursory. Outside the precinct, the media presence continued to grow as word spread about a high-ranking Pentagon official arriving in response to his father's detention. Community leaders began arriving as well, alerted through the rapid networks that had developed in response to similar incidents in the past. As the situation escalated beyond a simple detention to a potential nationwide story, Benjamin stepped away briefly to make a private call. James, it's Benjamin. I need to speak with General Caldwell immediately. General Robert Caldwell, the Hyde Air Force Chief of Staff and Benjamin's longtime mentor, answered within moments. Benjamin, I've been briefed on the situation. How's your father? The genuine concern in Caldwell's voice reminded Benjamin why he respected the man beyond his rank. He's shaken but resilient, sir. Always has been. What do you need from me, Benjamin? Caldwell asked directly. Benjamin paused, weighing his next words carefully. Sir, I'm about to take actions that may have repercussions. I wanted you to hear it from me directly before it hits the news. Does this involve the officers who detained your father? It involves a pattern of behavior that my father's case exemplifies. I can't and won't remain silent about it, even if it complicates matters professionally. The line was silent for a moment before Caldwell responded. Benjamin, you have my full support. Handle this as you see fit. Just remember that how you proceed will set precedent, not just for yourself, but potentially for others facing similar situations. Understood, sir, thank you. As Benjamin ended the call and prepared to rejoin his father, he understood that the next few hours would require all his strategic training, political acumen, and personal restraint. The incident that began with his father walking to buy a newspaper had escalated into a potential inflection point for police accountability, racial justice, and his own carefully built career. Joseph watched his son's approach with knowing eyes, recognizing the weight of command decisions in Benjamin's bearing. Whatever you're planning, son, I'm with you, he said simply when Benjamin returned to his side. I know, Dad, Benjamin replied. You always have been. The fluorescent lights of Conference Room B cast harsh shadows across the faces of the assembled department leadership as they huddled with legal counsel, the city attorney's stern expression reflecting the gravity of their predicament. Would you stand firm against systemic injustice, even if powerful institutions tried to silence you? Comment number 1. If you believe speaking truth to power is always worth the personal cost, or number 2, if you think strategic compromise sometimes achieves more lasting change. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that expose the reality of fighting for justice in America. Now let's see how the Turner family confronts the powerful forces aligning against them. The optics are catastrophic, Assistant City Attorney Melissa Davidson stated bluntly, spreading photographs from Martha Whitaker's security footage across the table. A decorated Vietnam veteran with bloody wrists, detained for walking in his own neighborhood, whose son happens to be a lieutenant general. The media will crucify us. Captain Wilson rubbed his temples, feeling the onset of a migraine. We need to get ahead of this. Administrative leave for Beckman and Hoffman is already in motion. Davidson nodded crisply. Good start, but insufficient. The mayor wants a full internal affairs investigation launched immediately, with results within 72 hours, instead of the usual 90 days. From the corner of the room, a bulky man with a crew cut interrupted. That time frame is unacceptable. Officers have rights too. All eyes turned to Michael Brodsky, the police union representative who had arrived moments after hearing about the administrative leave orders. Rushing an investigation compromises due process and violates our contract. Davidson's expression hardened. Your officers violated Mr. Turner's constitutional rights on camera, Mr. Brodsky. The union might want to consider how vigorously it wishes to defend that position in the court of public opinion. While the department leadership grappled with damage control, Joseph and Benjamin Turner found themselves in the precinct captain's office, facing their own pressure campaign. A different city attorney slid papers across the desk toward Joseph. Mr. Turner, the city is prepared to offer a generous settlement to resolve this unfortunate incident expeditiously. The agreement includes financial compensation and a formal apology. Benjamin noticed the non-disclosure clause immediately, his years of reviewing military contracts making the restrictive language jump out from the page. You're asking my father to sign away his right to speak about what happened to him today. The attorney maintained a professional smile. The agreement allows for resolution without prolonged litigation, which could take years and cause unnecessary stress for your father at his age. Joseph's expression remained impassive as he slid the papers back across the desk. I didn't fight for this country to have my rights negotiated away behind closed doors. No, thank you. The settlement offer was merely the opening salvo in what quickly became a coordinated pressure campaign. As Benjamin stepped outside to take a call from his aide in Washington, his phone buzzed with a message from General Williams, the Joint Chiefs Chairman. Need to discuss Oakland situation. Call ASAP. Benjamin recognized the implicit message. The military hierarchy was concerned about a high-ranking officer becoming publicly embroiled in a civilian police controversy. Meanwhile, Sergeant Martinez found herself isolated at her desk, colleagues giving her a wide berth after word spread about her role in contacting military channels. Didn't take you for a rat, Martinez, Officer Collins muttered as he passed. I took you for a cop who follows proper procedure, she replied, without looking up from her computer. My mistake about you, too. Outside the precinct, the crowd had grown from a few media vans to dozens of community members holding hastily made signs reading, Justice for Joseph Turner, and Veterans deserve respect. Joseph's military connections had mobilized with remarkable speed. A group of Vietnam veterans, both black and white, stood at attention near the precinct steps, creating a powerful visual statement about brotherhood that transcended race. The veterans had learned of Joseph's detention through Ricardo Mendez, his former platoon mate who still lived in San Leandro. When I heard what happened to Joe, I made some calls, the 75-year-old veteran explained to reporters. We fought together in Quang Tri province in '69. He saved 3 men from a burning helicopter while under enemy fire. and this is how his country thanks him? The community response intensified when Deshaun Williams, the law student who had shared Joseph's holding cell, emerged from the precinct after his release. Recognizing the significance of the unfolding situation, he immediately connected Joseph with the Berkeley Law Civil Rights Clinic where he interned. "Mr. Turner, these attorneys specialize in police misconduct cases," Deshaun explained, introducing Joseph to Professor Eleanor Jackson, the clinic's director. They've handled similar cases throughout Northern California. While this grassroots support gathered momentum, Benjamin found himself navigating increasingly complex political currents. His second call with General Williams carried unmistakable subtext about maintaining military neutrality in civilian matters and considering the broader implications for the chain of command. Benjamin recognized the message: handle this. Privately, settle quietly, don't make waves. The institutional pressure continued mounting when Mayor Coleman requested a private meeting with both Turners. "I understand your frustration," she began, her political experience evident in her careful phrasing. "As a black woman in leadership, I've faced my share of discrimination, but we need to consider the most effective path forward." Benjamin noted her use of effective rather than just or right. "What path do you suggest, Mayor Coleman?" Joseph asked, his tone respectful but unwavering. "A joint statement announcing reforms to department training, a settlement acknowledging harm without assigning specific blame, and a community forum to address broader concerns." Her proposal was politically elegant: action without accountability, change without consequences for specific officers. "And Officers Beckman and Hoffman?" Benjamin asked. The mayor hesitated. "Administrative reassignment pending retraining." Joseph exchanged a glance with his son, decades of unspoken understanding passing between them. "That's insufficient, Mayor Coleman," Joseph stated simply. "Those officers didn't fail their training. They followed their instincts, which told them a black man didn't belong in that neighborhood regardless of his age or military service. No amount of retraining addresses that fundamental problem." As they left the mayor's office, Benjamin's phone buzzed with an incoming call from General Caldwell. "The Secretary of Defense is being briefed on the situation," Caldwell informed him without preamble. "There's concern about how your involvement might be perceived politically." Benjamin felt the weight of his stars pressing down on his shoulders. "Sir, with respect, this isn't political. This is personal. My father was mistreated because of his race despite his service to this country." Caldwell's sigh carried through the phone. "Benjamin, everything involving a lieutenant general becomes political whether we want it to or not. The Secretary supports you personally, but needs to maintain institutional neutrality." The message was becoming increasingly clear. Benjamin's carefully built career, his decades of service and sacrifice, might be compromised by standing too firmly beside his father in this fight. The day's strain began taking a visible toll on Joseph as evening approached. The medical examination had confirmed elevated blood pressure and stress-induced cardiac symptoms that warranted monitoring. Yet when Benjamin suggested they postpone further meetings until morning, Joseph straightened his shoulders. "I've endured worse in service to this country. We finish what we started." Their resolve was immediately tested when they learned the police union had scheduled a press conference defending Officers Beckman and Hoffman, framing them as dedicated public servants facing unfair scrutiny for following standard procedure in a high-crime region. Simultaneously, conservative media began running segments questioning why a Pentagon official was interfering in local law enforcement matters, with one commentator suggesting Benjamin was leveraging his military position for a personal agenda. The coordinated pushback represented a familiar pattern to both Turners, the system protecting itself, redirecting narrative focus from the fundamental injustice to procedural details and character implications. As Joseph and Benjamin considered, their response, Martha Whitaker, surprised them by requesting a meeting. The elderly neighbor entered the conference room clutching a tablet computer. "There's something you should know," she began hesitantly. "After reviewing my security footage more carefully, I found additional videos from the past month." She turned the tablet toward them, showing clear footage of Officers Beckman and Hoffman stopping two other black men in the neighborhood under similar pretexts. They've been doing this systematically. I didn't realize until today because—" She paused, embarrassment coloring her features. "Because I never thought to question it before." Her honesty about her own complicity through inaction represented a small but significant crack in the wall of institutional resistance. That crack widened further when Deshaun Williams returned with Professor Jackson and 3 other law students, carrying boxes of documents. "We've been researching department records," Deshaun explained. "In the past 18 months, Officers Beckman and Hoffman have detained 37 people in predominantly white neighborhoods for suspicious behavior. 35 were people of color. 0 resulted in arrests for actual crimes." The statistical evidence transformed the narrative from a single unfortunate incident to a pattern of systematic civil rights violations. As this evidence mounted, Joseph turned to Benjamin, his expression resolute despite his evident fatigue. "Son, I need to make a statement. Not behind closed doors, not through lawyers, directly to the community." Benjamin understood immediately what his father was proposing and the potential consequences for both of them. "Dad, are you certain? Once we take this public in that way, there's no controlling how it unfolds." Joseph nodded once, decisively. "I've spent 74 years being careful, strategic, and patient. Sometimes justice requires standing in the public square and speaking truth, regardless of consequence." As Benjamin weighed his father's words against the institutional pressure from the military hierarchy, his phone buzzed with breaking news. The Department of Justice had announced a preliminary inquiry into pattern or practice violations within the Oakland Police Department. The system was pushing back with all its considerable force, but cracks were beginning to show in its carefully constructed facade. The morning sun illuminated the steps of Oakland City Hall as Joseph Turner stood before a forest of microphones, his military bearing intact despite the visible bandages on his wrists and the exhaustion lining his face after 24 sleepless hours. Benjamin stood slightly behind his father, his dress uniform drawing both respectful glances and suspicious scrutiny from the assembled press corps. "Yesterday afternoon, I was arrested while walking to purchase a newspaper in the neighborhood, where I've lived for 2 weeks. Joseph began, his voice steady and clear. "I was handcuffed, detained for hours without charges, and denied my legal rights, not because of any crime, but because officers decided a black man couldn't possibly belong in that neighborhood." As Joseph methodically recounted his experience, cameras captured every detail for national broadcasts that would soon make the Turner case a focal point in America's ongoing conversation about race and policing. Across town, Officers Beckman and Hoffman sat in the studios of National Daily News, a conservative outlet that had rushed them into a live interview with host Trevor Carson. "Officer Beckman, you've been portrayed as racially motivated in your detention of Joseph Turner. How do you respond?" Carson asked, his tone suggesting sympathy for the embattled officers. Beckman, freshly coached by union representatives, leaned forward earnestly. "This had nothing to do with race. We responded to community concerns about an unknown individual in an area with recent burglaries. We followed standard procedure for suspicious persons who cannot produce identification." Hoffman nodded in agreement. "We're being vilified for doing our jobs. The Turner family is using the general's military position to intimidate the department and bypass normal procedures." The dueling narratives unfolded across media platforms throughout the day, with political commentators quickly aligning along predictable ideological lines. Conservative outlets emphasized law and order and proper police procedure, while progressive sources highlighted systemic racism and veteran mistreated. Inside the Pentagon, Benjamin's absence had created ripples of tension throughout the chain of command. General Williams convened a meeting with senior staff, his expression grave as he addressed the room. Lieutenant General Turner's personal situation has become a matter of national attention. While we support his family concerns, the optics of military leadership appearing to take positions on domestic law enforcement raises complex questions about civilian-military boundaries. The message filtered down through the ranks. Benjamin's previously assured promotion to full general might now be reconsidered. His decades of exemplary service weighed against the political complications of his current stance. Benjamin received this information via a secure call from his aide, Colonel Harrington. "Sir, I thought you should know. The Promotion Board has requested your file for additional review." Benjamin absorbed this news with the same strategic calm that had served him through combat zones. "Understood, James. Keep me informed of any further developments." When he ended the call, Benjamin found his father watching him with knowing eyes. "They're threatening your career," Joseph stated rather than asked. Benjamin neither confirmed nor denied, but his silence was answer enough. "Son, I never wanted this to jeopardize everything you've built." Benjamin straightened his uniform jacket, a habitual gesture before difficult decisions. "Dad, everything I've built was possible because you taught me that principles matter more than comfort. I learned integrity from watching you face discrimination with dignity for decades." His voice carried the weight of conviction. "Some battles choose us rather than the other way around." While the Turners navigated their personal crossroads, the community response continued gathering momentum. Residents from Joseph's neighborhood arrived at the temporary command center established by Deshawn and Professor Jackson, offering additional security footage that revealed a pattern of selective enforcement by officers Beckman and Hoffman. "They followed my son to the door every time he visited," explained Dr. Raymond Chen, an oncologist who lived 2 streets from Joseph. "Never stopped white delivery drivers, though." These community testimonials transformed into formal statements for the Department of Justice investigation, creating a comprehensive picture of systematic discrimination. Sergeant Martinez faced increasing hostility within the department as her role in alerting military channels became widely known. Anonymous. Notes appeared in her locker with a single word: traitor. The precinct's break room fell silent whenever she entered. Captain Wilson called her into his office, his expression carefully neutral. "Sergeant, given the current tension, perhaps you'd prefer temporary reassignment to administrative duties." Martinez recognized the offer for what it was: punishment, disguised as concern. "With respect, Captain, I'll continue my regular duties unless you're formally disciplining me for following proper procedure." Her resistance came with consequences. The next day's patrol assignments placed her in the highest crime area with a rookie partner. A clear message about what happened to officers who broke the blue wall of silence. The department's internal pressure tactics extended beyond Martinez to any officer who expressed concern about the Turner case. Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had questioned the handling of Joseph's detention, suddenly found himself under investigation for a 3-year-old civilian complaint that had previously been dismissed. The message was clear: stand with the department, or face consequences. Despite these intimidation tactics, cracks in the united front continued appearing. Officer Jenkins, a 20-year veteran nearing retirement, requested a meeting with Internal Affairs. "I've witnessed Beckman and Hoffman targeting minorities consistently for the past 18 months, he reported, providing dates and incident numbers. "I didn't speak up before because, well, you know why." His testimony corroborated the statistical evidence Deshawn had uncovered, adding insider confirmation to the documented pattern. As public attention intensified, Joseph received thousands of letters from veterans across the country, sharing similar experiences of discrimination despite their service. One envelope contained a faded photograph of an integrated platoon in Vietnam with a simple note: "We bled the same color for this country. Why don't they see that?" These personal connections strengthened Joseph's resolve, even as his health showed signs of strain from the ongoing stress. The medical monitoring revealed concerning fluctuations in his blood pressure and cardiac readings, prompting Benjamin to insist on regular rest periods between meetings and interviews. During one such rest period, Benjamin received an unexpected call from General Caldwell. "The Secretary of Defense is watching this situation closely, Benjamin." Caldwell's tone carried unusual tension. "There's significant pressure from certain political quarters to distance the military from what they're calling a civilian police matter." Benjamin understood the subtext immediately. "Is this a formal order to stand down, sir?" The pause before Caldwell's response spoke volumes. "Not at this time. But I would be remiss not to inform you that your actions will have consequences for your career trajectory. Benjamin's response was measured but firm. With respect, sir, I understand that consequences. My father faced similar choices throughout his career, often sacrificing advancement to maintain his integrity. I'm prepared to do the same if necessary. The political dimension of the case expanded further when Congressman James Harrington, chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, issued a public statement questioning whether military leadership should be involving themselves in local law enforcement matters and suggesting oversight hearings might be appropriate. The implication was clear. Benjamin's military career was being leveraged as pressure to resolve the situation quietly. Martha Whitaker proved an unexpected ally in countering this political maneuvering. The elderly white neighbor who had provided the initial security footage organized a neighborhood association meeting attended by prominent community members, including several with political connections. These officers have been systematically harassing people of color in our neighborhood, she testified, her social standing lending credibility that was difficult to dismiss. I'm ashamed to admit I noticed, but did nothing until it happened too. Mr. Turner, her candor about her own prior inaction resonated with many residents who recognized their own complicity through silence. The neighborhood association voted unanimously to submit a formal complaint to the Civilian Oversight Board and request department-wide reform of stop and identify procedures. The department's last major counteroffensive came through an unexpected channel. A leaked document questioning aspects of Joseph's military record appeared on several right-wing websites, suggesting he had exaggerated his service decorations. The smear attempt backfired spectacularly when military records confirmed not only Joseph's Purple Hearts and Bronze Star, but revealed additional acts of heroism that he had never publicly claimed. His former commanding officer, now a retired colonel, called a press conference to describe how Joseph had carried a wounded soldier 3 miles to safety while under enemy fire, an act of bravery documented in military records but never mentioned by Joseph himself. His modesty about his service makes this attack on his character particularly despicable, the colonel stated, his anger barely contained. As the battle lines hardened between institutional resistance and community demand for accountability, Deshaun Williams organized law students to conduct a comprehensive review of department arrest records, creating a statistical analysis that revealed clear racial disparities in discretionary enforcement actions. This data provided crucial support for the Department of Justice investigation, moving the case beyond individual officers to systemic department practices. In a quiet moment between strategic meetings, Benjamin and Joseph found themselves alone, in the hotel room that had become their temporary headquarters. Dad, are you certain you want to continue pushing this? The settlement offers keep increasing. Joseph looked at his son with the same determined expression Benjamin remembered from childhood lessons about dignity. This stopped being about me the moment I saw those other cases. This is about every black person who accepts humiliation as the price of safety. Some battles are worth fighting regardless of outcome. Benjamin nodded, understanding completely. Then we continue. Their resolve would soon be tested beyond anything they had anticipated. As Joseph rose to get a glass of water, he suddenly clutched his chest, his face contorting with pain as he collapsed. Benjamin caught his father before he hit the floor, already calling for emergency services, as Joseph's eyes flickered with a mixture of pain and apology. The battle for justice had exacted a physical toll that even Joseph Turner's legendary strength could not indefinitely withstand. The rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors provided a sterile soundtrack to Benjamin Turner's vigil beside his father's bed in the cardiac care unit of Oakland Memorial Hospital. Joseph lay connected to various machines monitoring his heart function, his normally commanding presence diminished by the institutional gown and medical apparatus. The diagnosis had been clear: severe stress-induced cardiac event requiring immediate intervention. The cardiologist had been blunt during her briefing. Your father's heart shows signs of previous damage, likely from his age and war injuries. This current episode was triggered by extreme stress. He needs absolute rest and minimal stimulation for recovery. Benjamin had immediately taken emergency family leave, the first time in his 29-year military career that he had prioritized personal matters over professional duties. The decision had been automatic, but carried significant professional implications. The crucial Pentagon leadership meeting he would miss had been specifically scheduled to evaluate candidates for the Joint Chiefs position that represented the EO's pinnacle of military achievement. His absence would speak volumes to the selection committee about his priorities. Captain Wilson had personally called to express concern about Joseph's condition, though Benjamin detected the institutional calculation. Beneath the sympathy, the department undoubtedly worried about potential liability should Joseph's health deteriorate further. The media narrative shifted dramatically with Joseph's hospitalization, the human cost of the confrontation now impossible to ignore. Headlines like "Decorated Veteran Hospitalized After Police Detention Stress" and "Turner Family Pays Physical, Price for Justice Fight" dominated news cycles, creating a sympathetic frame that department spokespeople struggled to counter. Inside the department, the unified front protecting officers Beckman and Hoffman began showing significant fractures. Leaked body camera footage revealed Officer Hoffman whispering to Beckman during Joseph's initial detention, "Another one who doesn't know his place," contradicting their public claims about non-racial motivations. When confronted with this evidence during departmental interviews, the officers began offering conflicting accounts of the incident. "Beckman told me the suspect was acting suspiciously," Hoffman claimed, distancing himself from the decision to detain Joseph. Beckman countered in his separate interview. "Hoffman was the one who suggested we stop him because he looked out of place in the neighborhood." Their mutual recrimination marked a critical turning point, the thin blue line cracking under pressure, as self-preservation instincts overrode solidarity. Captain Wilson found himself in an increasingly untenable position as internal affairs investigators uncovered emails showing he had previously dismissed civilian complaints about both officers' conduct toward minorities. The revelation directly contradicted his public statements about taking all allegations of bias seriously and suggested a pattern of supervisory negligence. Mayor Coleman, initially cautious in her response to the Turner case, found her political calculations shifting as public opinion coalesced around Joseph. Her office issued a stronger statement calling for complete transparency and accountability at all levels of the department, signaling her recognition that the political winds now favored reform over institutional protection. Benjamin divided his time between his father's hospital room and conference calls with the growing legal and advocacy team supporting their case. During one such call, Deshaun Williams shared a breakthrough discovery. "We've identified 37 cases with nearly identical patterns involving Beckman and Hoffman. 7 victims have agreed to join a class-action civil rights lawsuit." Professor Jackson added, "The statistical evidence is overwhelming. The stop rates for people of color in predominantly white neighborhoods exceed those for white individuals by a factor of 12. While these legal developments unfolded, Joseph received thousands of cards and letters from veterans and citizens nationwide. Benjamin read them aloud during his father's conscious periods, the outpouring of support providing emotional medicine that complemented the hospital's clinical care. One letter particularly moved Joseph, a handwritten note from a young black Air Force cadet who wrote, "Your dignity under fire, both in Vietnam and in Oakland, shows me what real strength looks like. I hope to serve with the same honor." Benjamin noticed tears in his father's eyes as he finished reading it. "That makes it all worthwhile," Joseph whispered. His voice weakened, but his spirit undiminished. The hospital room became an unlikely command center as Martha Whitaker organized neighborhood support, coordinating meal deliveries and creating a volunteer schedule to ensure Benjamin could focus on his father's care. Her efficiency impressed the Lieutenant General, who recognized the same organizational skills that had made her a successful business executive before retirement. "I spent decades in corporate boardrooms pretending not to notice discrimination," Martha confided during one quiet moment while Joseph slept. "It took seeing your father in handcuffs to realize my silence was complicity." Her candor reflected a broader awakening among community members who had previously considered themselves merely bystanders to systemic injustice. The Department of Justice investigation gained momentum as federal investigators interviewed department personnel and reviewed records. Their preliminary findings, leaked to the Washington Post, indicated significant concerns about pattern or practice violations regarding racial discrimination in discretionary enforcement actions. The federal involvement elevated the case beyond local politics, creating accountability structures that transcended departmental self-protection mechanisms. Sergeant Martinez found herself in the precinct parking lot late one evening, discovering her car windows smashed and a note on her windshield reading "Race Traitor." Rather than intimidating her, the vandalism strengthened her resolve. The next morning, she formally requested transfer to the newly formed Accountability Division, stating in her application, "Recent events have clarified my understanding of what police work should prioritize: justice over fraternity, truth over loyalty." Her application received immediate approval, as department leadership recognized the political value of having a Hispanic female officer prominently positioned in their accountability efforts. Benjamin and Joseph engaged in a painful but necessary conversation about balancing justice with health realities. "Dad, the doctors are saying this stress could kill you," Benjamin explained gently. "We need to consider whether continuing this fight is worth that risk." Joseph's response came slowly, but with characteristic clarity. "Son, I've faced death before. In Vietnam, during your mother's illness, in my own health battles. The question isn't whether this fight might kill me, but whether staying silent would let me live with myself." He reached for Benjamin's hand, with surprising strength. "Some burdens are generational. Your mother and I carried ours so you could climb higher. Perhaps your son will stand on your shoulders and see a different landscape entirely." The conversation affirmed their shared commitment, while acknowledging the physical toll of their stance. Benjamin ensured his father received the best medical care available, leveraging his military connections to consult with top cardiologists about treatment options. While Joseph's condition stabilized, doctors emphasized that his recovery required minimizing stress, a near-impossible prescription given the circumstances. The police department's final desperate attempt to control the narrative came through Joseph's military record. Anonymous sources provided selective service information to sympathetic media outlets, suggesting discrepancies in his account of combat experience. The tactic represented a fundamental miscalculation about Joseph Turner. Far from exaggerating his service, Joseph had consistently downplayed his heroism throughout his life. When full military records became public, including previously classified mission reports, the extent of his sacrifice for his country became undeniable. The Bronze Star citation described how he had repeatedly exposed himself to enemy fire to extract wounded personnel during an ambush in Quang Tri Province. Witness statements from his unit members detailed additional acts of courage that Joseph had never mentioned, even to Benjamin. This attempted character assassination transformed into perhaps the most powerful vindication of Joseph's integrity, generating a wave of support from veterans organizations nationwide. The veterans of foreign wars issued a statement condemning any attempt to dishonor the service of those who have bled for this nation, while the American Legion organized a support rally outside the hospital. On the 7th day of Joseph's hospitalization, as Benjamin reviewed legal documents beside his father's bed, Deshawn burst into the room with news that would reshape the case entirely. "The Civil Rights Division just called. They've uncovered departmental text messages between Captain Wilson and the officers from the past 6 months. They explicitly discussed targeting outsiders in affluent neighborhoods with clear racial references. The evidence shattered any remaining pretense about isolated incidents or misunderstandings, revealing institutional knowledge and tacit approval of discriminatory practices. The revelation forced Mayor Coleman to take a definitive position, announcing the formation of an independent review commission with subpoena power to investigate department-wide practices. As public pressure mounted, Benjamin received another call from General Caldwell. "The political winds have shifted, Benjamin. The Secretary now believes the military must be seen supporting veterans regardless of race. Your promotion review has been expedited and approved." The message was clear. What had been politically inconvenient had become politically advantageous as public opinion solidified around Joseph. Benjamin received this news with complex emotions, recognizing both the vindication and the calculation behind it. Joseph's medical team had just delivered a cautiously optimistic update about his condition when breaking news alerts sounded on Benjamin's phone. Captain Wilson had resigned, effective immediately, citing personal reasons, but clearly responding to the imminent release of additional damaging communications. The department announced comprehensive leadership changes and a review of all policies related to reasonable suspicion and community engagement. For the Turner family, this institutional accountability represented meaningful progress, yet came at extraordinary personal cost. As Joseph watched the news from his hospital bed, his expression reflected not triumph, but sober recognition of how much effort was required to move the needle of justice even slightly. That evening, as Benjamin stepped out to take a call from his aide in Washington, Joseph suffered a sudden cardiac arrhythmia, setting off alarms throughout the monitoring system. Medical personnel rushed into the room as Benjamin returned, watching helplessly as his father was rushed into emergency surgery. The battle for justice had always carried personal stakes, but as Benjamin waited outside the operating room, those stakes had never been more starkly evident. The system's resistance had exacted a physical toll that decades of war and hardship had not, a reality that would forever shape how both men understood the true cost of standing against institutional power. 3 months after his collapse at the height of the controversy, Joseph Turner knelt carefully in his garden, his weathered hands working methodically among the rose bushes that had become both hobby and therapy during his recovery. The spring sunshine warmed his shoulders as he positioned a new trellis, his movements more deliberate than before, but carrying the same precision that had characterized his military service decades earlier. The cardiac surgery had been successful, though. His doctors emphasized that his recovery remained fragile, a reality Joseph acknowledged but refused to be limited by. The Oakland Hills neighborhood around him had transformed as profoundly as his health situation. Neighbors who had once watched suspiciously from windows now stopped to chat or brought occasional baked goods. Martha Whitaker approached along the garden path carrying a folder of documents. "Good morning, Joseph. The Neighborhood Association approved the community policing proposal unanimously. Implementation begins next month." Joseph straightened slowly, mindful of his doctor's cautions about sudden movements. "That's excellent news, Martha. Who would have thought my little walk for a newspaper would end up changing department policy?" Martha's expression grew serious. "It wasn't just the policy that needed changing. It was people like me who saw problems and remained comfortable in our silence." Their conversation exemplified the personal transformations that had paralleled the institutional ones, in the wake of what local media now called the Turner case. Across town, at the Oakland Police Department, the changes were equally visible. Officers Beckman and Hoffman had been terminated following the completion of internal affairs investigations that substantiated multiple violations of department policy and constitutional rights. More significantly, both faced criminal charges for falsifying police reports, with additional civil rights violation charges under consideration by federal prosecutors. The case that began with Joseph's detention had expanded to encompass 37 similar incidents, creating a pattern of evidence that proved impossible to dismiss as isolated misconduct. Former Captain Wilson had resigned in disgrace after text messages revealed his awareness and tacit approval of discriminatory practices. His replacement, Captain Alicia Washington, a black woman with 22 years of experience and a reputation for integrity, had immediately implemented new protocols for reasonable suspicion determinations and community engagement. Among the most significant departmental changes was the promotion of Sergeant Diana Martinez to head a newly created Professional Standards and Community Accountability Division, with authority to review officer conduct and recommend disciplinary action, independent of the traditional chain of command. Her first official act had been to implement mandatory civil rights training for all officers, led by a team that included Deshaun Williams, who had accelerated his law studies while continuing to advocate for systemic reform. The Department of Justice investigation had resulted in a consent decree requiring comprehensive reforms in stop and identify procedures, with quarterly progress reports and federal monitoring for a minimum of 5 years. These institutional changes represented meaningful progress, yet the personal cost remained evident in Joseph's slower movements and the medication regimen that now structured his days. At the Pentagon, Benjamin Turner's promotion to full general had proceeded despite, or perhaps because of, his unwavering support for his father throughout the controversy. The military hierarchy, initially concerned about his involvement in a civilian police matter, had ultimately recognized that abandoning his father would have contradicted the very values of honor and integrity the armed forces claimed to uphold. Benjamin's new position gave him unprecedented influence over military policy, which he leveraged to address systemic discrimination within the armed forces. His first major initiative established comprehensive bias recognition training for officer candidates, using his father's experience as a case study in how veterans of color often face discrimination despite their service. Joseph's kitchen table, once occupied primarily by medication bottles and medical instructions, now held stacks of handwritten letters from across the country. Veterans sharing similar experiences, young people inspired by his dignity under pressure, community organizations requesting his involvement in advocacy efforts. One letter had particularly touched him, a note from a young black family who had recently moved into the neighborhood, expressing gratitude for making the community more welcoming for their children. While Joseph's health continued improving, incrementally, he focused his limited energy on completing the memoir he had begun years earlier, but never prioritized. Serving While Black, From Vietnam to Oakland, chronicled not only his military experiences, but the consistent thread of having his humanity and citizenship questioned despite his sacrifices for the country. The manuscript had already attracted interest from major publishers, with proceeds designated for a foundation supporting veterans facing discrimination. On a warm Saturday morning, Joseph received the visitor he had been anticipating for weeks. President Eleanor Mitchell had requested a private meeting during her visit to California, away from cameras and media attention. The first black woman to hold the office, she had followed the Turner case closely, recognizing its significance in the ongoing national conversation about race and policing. "Master Sergeant Turner," she greeted him, using his military rank with deliberate respect. "It's an honor to meet you. Your story has affected me deeply, both personally and as Commander-in-Chief." Joseph welcomed her into his modest living room, where they spoke for nearly an hour about his experiences and her own efforts to address systemic inequities. "The White House would like to present you with the Presidential Medal of Freedom," she explained, "in recognition of your military service and your courage in standing for justice at great personal cost." Joseph considered the offer carefully before responding. "Madam President, I'm deeply honored. However, I would prefer that any recognition be directed toward concrete policy changes." He outlined his proposal for a comprehensive overhaul of police academy training nationwide, incorporating veterans of color as speakers and trainers to humanize the consequences of biased enforcement. Medals gather dust on shelves but changed. Practices save lives and dignity daily. The president studied him with newfound respect. "That's an unusual request, Sergeant Turner." "These are unusual times, Madam President. They require unusual approaches." She nodded thoughtfully. "I'll have my team explore implementation immediately." Their conversation concluded with a discussion of how military values might better translate to civilian law enforcement: discipline without dehumanization, authority with accountability, strength guided by wisdom. As the presidential motorcade departed, Joseph turned his attention to the afternoon's planned event, a community gathering at the neighborhood park where he and Benjamin would plant a memorial tree commemorating not only Joseph's ordeal, but the community's collective journey toward greater understanding. The ceremony brought together unlikely allies: Martha Whitaker and her neighborhood association, Sergeant Martinez and reform-minded officers, Deshaun Williams and his fellow law students, Joseph's Vietnam veteran comrades, and dozens of community members whose perspectives had been transformed through the controversy. Benjamin, wearing civilian clothes rather than his uniform to emphasize his presence as a son rather than a general, stood beside his father as they lowered a young oak sapling into prepared ground. This tree represents justice with deep roots and branches that offer shelter to all, Joseph explained to the gathered crowd. Like justice, it requires consistent attention and care to thrive. And like our community, it grows stronger through storms rather than despite them. As father and son patted soil around the sapling's base, their hands, one weathered by decades of service and struggle, one strengthened by battles both military and personal, worked in tandem, representing the generational nature of both struggle and progress. The gathering eventually transitioned to a community potluck, where conversations flowed across previously rigid social boundaries, wealthy residents engaging with community activists, police officers discussing reform with civil rights attorneys, veterans of different eras and backgrounds sharing experiences across generations. Joseph observed these interactions with quiet satisfaction, recognizing that meaningful change often began with simple human connections across divided spaces. As evening approached and the gathering dispersed, Joseph noticed a car pulling into a driveway several houses down, a black family unloading moving boxes, children exploring their new yard with excited energy. Benjamin followed his father's gaze. "New neighbors?" Joseph nodded, already moving in their direction. "Let's welcome them properly." The simple act, a black elder and decorated veteran welcoming newcomers to a neighborhood where he had once been handcuffed for walking, represented both how much had changed and how much remained unchanged in America's complex relationship with race and belonging. As they approached the family, Joseph extended his hand in greeting, offering the dignity and welcome he had once been denied. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said warmly. "I'm Joseph Turner. This is my son, Benjamin. We're glad you're here. Have you ever witnessed discrimination in your community and wondered if speaking up could make a difference?" Joseph Turner's story shows how one person's stand for dignity can transform entire systems. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share to help others understand the ongoing journey toward justice in America. Thank you for joining us in exploring how courage and conviction can create lasting change, even when the personal cost is high. Remember, in the words of Joseph Turner, "Some battles choose us, and our response defines not just our character, but our nations." Joseph Turner's story teaches us that dignity cannot be taken unless surrendered. Throughout his ordeal, from Vietnam battlefields to Oakland streets, Joseph maintained his self-respect despite systemic attempts to diminish him. His unwavering composure in the face of injustice proved more powerful than the authority wielded against him. The story demonstrates how institutional change requires both personal courage and collective action. Joseph's individual stand created opportunity, but lasting transformation came through the combined efforts of many, from his military son leveraging his position, to the neighbor overcoming her complicity, to the law student using his education for justice. We learn that systems resist change through predictable patterns: denial, deflection, discrediting, and finally damage control. Recognizing these tactics is essential for effective advocacy. Perhaps most importantly, this story reveals the generational nature of both oppression and resistance. Joseph's words to Benjamin, "Some burdens are generational. Your mother and I carried ours so you could climb higher," remind us that progress often happens across lifetimes rather than news cycles. True transformation requires not just policy changes, but personal awakening. Martha Whitaker's acknowledgement, that it took seeing your father in handcuffs to realize my silence was complicity, illustrates how systemic injustice depends on the comfortable indifference of bystanders. Finally, Joseph shows us that even painful experiences can become catalysts for community healing when approached with wisdom and dignity. Has there been a moment in your life when you witnessed injustice and had to decide whether to speak up or remain silent? What factors influenced your decision? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might inspire others to find their courage when facing similar situations. If Joseph Turner's journey of dignity and determination resonated with you, please hit that like button to help. this important narrative reach more viewers. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that illuminate the ongoing struggle for equality and justice in America. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message about standing firm against discrimination, even when systems push back, share this video with them today. Thank you for joining us in exploring how courage in the face of prejudice can transform not just individual lives but entire communities. Remember, in the words of Joseph Turner, "Some battles choose us, and our response defines not just our character, but our nation's future."